This time, Fergie's Man United treble winners, the ultimate comeback kids.
And it's no nay never, no nay never, no more, 'cause I'll stay a while over forever and more. And it's no nay never, no nay never, no more, 'cause I'll stay a while over forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt to decide once and for all who is the greatest football team of all time. Sometimes, like Liverpool letting Milan race into a 3-goal lead in Istanbul, greatness is assured. Other times, like Southampton giving Man United a 4-goal head start at half-time, a different fate awaits. My name's Graham Dunn. No Oxford United reference too small for me. And joining me as ever, and this week battling a classic heart versus data tug-of-war, it's Jamie Rooney.
Hey Graham, thank you for the intro and welcome. Yeah, this is a good one for me. Not only have I got my beloved Manchester United being on this podcast before you Oxford, although Oxford have appeared on this podcast every single week since we've been doing it, I've got two incredibly good friends, lifelong friends actually, United fans that have been responsible for me for probably going to most of my United games. I think most of my ticket sources come through these guys. So yeah, there's a kind of a nice debt of gratitude. So I'm going to play the nice card all night, I think.
Wow, that's very impressive. Yes, it was inevitable that we'd have to do it on a Greatest Football Teams podcast. Eventually, we were going to have to do a Manchester United side. Question, of course, is which of those great Man United teams to do. I've obviously settled that we're going to go do David Moyes' Man United, which I think might be one of the better ones. No, we have to go back to the amazing treble winners of 1999. And delighted we have not just one United fan in the room, we have two more we're adding in. Welcome, Richard Evans and David Cooke.
Hi, Graham. Thanks for having us, and delighted to be here. I've waited for a long time to get to this team, and at last you've achieved. Many thanks for that.
As you'll see, Richard will do most of the talking.
I've got three United fans in the room here with me, so I'm not expecting to get a word in edgeways.
Probably right.
Yeah.
When I start to think about this United side, and comeback it's not quite the right term for this, but it is a thread that goes across this particular United side. And it did get us thinking about comebacks generally, because at the weekend we obviously had Wrexham coming back from 4-1 at halftime to claim a dramatic 5-5. And I think every team at some point has had these kind of dramatic comebacks. And to some extent, I think, for me, the whole Ferguson era is almost summed up by that comeback, the Steve Bruce goals at Hillsborough, Sheffield Wednesday.
I think this season we're talking about, it started right at the beginning. At home to Leicester, we were 2-0 down, very first game of the season, and we came back to draw 2-2. And then we drew the next game as well, so it was a very poor start for the season, but that was typical for Ferguson.
And I think also the number of late goals and late finishes was just unbelievable. Everybody remembers Barcelona, of course. The only time since the Second World War where we were losing a game going into injury time and then won it without going to extra time. But there were other games. Liverpool in the FA Cup, fourth round, phenomenal game. And one of the best atmospheres I can remember at Old Trafford. So there were a number of really, really late goals during the season. And by the way, it was at Old Trafford, not Hillsborough. But I won't hold it against you.
Also, on the subject of Barcelona, I was fortunate enough to meet Kalina a few times, who was the ref that night. And I had a chat with him about the final. And he turned around to me and says, "Wow, I was the guy that added on the extra time. Otherwise, you would have lost 1-0.
Though United won them for their comebacks, another team with a glorious record of comebacks is also from Manchester. When I was looking through this, and not a game I'd totally forgotten about. This is back in an era I can barely remember Kevin Keegan managing Man City, but he did, and they play Tottenham. It seems unlikely that Tottenham could possibly be several goals up in a game and give it away. Tottenham play a cup game against Manchester City in 2004, go 3 up by half-time, and also seems unlikely this could ever happen. Joey Barton gets sent off Man City. So Man City, 10 men and 3-0 down, and still somehow come back and win that game 4-3. I mean, I can't really fathom how a team can win from 3 goals down and a player down. That just seems mad.
We weren't a player down, but we did it at White Hart Lane, 3-0 down half-time, and we won 5-3 with the magnificent Veron in the side.
Very, very underrated player, Veron. Class player.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's an interesting link between that game and another amazing comeback involving a team from the Greater Manchester area. So Gary Neville obviously was responsible for that cross to Andy Cole in the 46th minute that got United back into the game, and they went on to beat Spurs 5-3. So Gary Neville famously is the owner of Salford City. Now, Salford City were playing Kidderminster in the National Northern League in 2018 in March. It's getting towards the end of the season, and both teams are going for the single automatic promotion into the conference. Salford are trailing 4-0 after 80 minutes. And it looks like it's all over. Harrogate are going to stay top. And then in the 80th minute, Askew gets one back for Salford. And the commentator's like, it's a consolation. And then that stays 4-1 to the 89th minute. And in the 89th minute, a corner swung in, header goes in. It's 4-2. And then, incredibly, 5 minutes are added on. In the 93rd minute, keeper spills one, and it's 4-3. And suddenly the belief in Salford has changed. And then in the 95th minute, there's a scramble in the penalty area. A Salford player gets absolutely scythed down from one of the Kidderminster players. Referee points to the spot penalty. Up steps the penalty taker. He squares it centre at the keeper. Keeper parries it, but parries it back into the path of the striker. They both scramble for the ball, and Walker, the penalty taker, slams it in. 4-4. Gary Neville's Salford, 4-0 down with 10 minutes to go, and they didn't lose that game. They went on to finish top of that league and get automatic promotion into the Conference League.
So what I like about that story, Jamie, in particular, is despite the fact you supported United all your life, you still haven't got the Mancunian way of saying Salford. So that amused me quite a lot.
I was wondering what team that was. I was genuinely wondering what team that was for a minute.
There was a very famous comeback, though, well, there were a few, but there were one very famous comeback in the treble-winning season, wasn't there? Against our nearest and dearest, 40 miles down the road, when they were beating us in the FA Cup.
It was an incredible game because it set the tone for what was going to happen in Barcelona. As you said, Dave, the whole scene was set in the very first game against Leicester, that comeback, and it was a bit of a slow start. But that Liverpool game, it really started to kind of garner some belief about what this United team was capable of, to be able to turn games around in the final minutes. I mean, obviously, we can explore the brilliance of Ferguson in terms of how he rotated players, but having 4 strikers in Cole, York, Sheringham and Solskjaer, who are responsible for those goals and all those comebacks, is a definite win in the back pocket. It was really, for me, one of the best comebacks I think I've ever seen in football for United, as Rick mentioned, the atmosphere at Old Trafford. But I never thought it was going to be bettered just a few months down the line.
Yeah.
But I think that as the season went on, I thought the games just got more and more intense and there was more drama. I'm sure we'll talk about the FA Cup semi-final 2 games. That replay absolutely had everything you could possibly want. From red cards to brilliant goals, phenomenal atmosphere. I think one of the worst decisions the FA ever did was to take the semi-finals away from the country, because Villa Park was a stunning location, not just for semi-finals, but the number of times United have been there and had some phenomenal games at Villa Park. It's just a fantastic old school atmosphere. And talking about Ollie, sorry, David, Ollie, brilliant stat. 18 goals in 17 starts. That was his stats for this season, which was incredible.
Well, isn't this the season where he came on as a substitute and scored? We're all saying, who's going to get the hat-trick? Is it Cole or is it York? And he came on and scored 4 in about 15 minutes at Forest.
It's Forest.
Yeah, Notts Forest, yeah. Fergie said to him, apparently, just keep it calm. We've won this game. We were 4-1 up at the time and then scored a hat-trick.
Yeah.
4 goals.
It was an extraordinary season, but I guess it actually stems from quite a disappointing season the year before. I mean, United had faced that kind of classic third title challenge, or that problem that teams seem to have in winning a title 3 times in a row.
Graham,
Kind of familiar feel.
it depends on your outlook. I think somebody like Edison, when he was inventing the light bulb, had about 9,000 experiments, and the interviewer said, so how did you deal with all the disappointment? And he said, it wasn't a disappointment. I would never have got to the answer if I hadn't gone through that process. We had to go through that process to win the next year, because then we went on to buy 3 decent players who helped us achieve it, and we weren't going to lose it 2 years in a row. So to me, it depends, how you want to look at things is a choice. You can't determine what happens in life because, things happen to you, but you can choose how you look at it. And I think that was just the stimulus we needed to go on and do the treble the next year.
Fergie was brilliant at changing the team. So when they didn't deliver, he would go out. He bought Stam, obviously. He tried to get Kluivert, and Kluivert wouldn't even talk to him and went to Barcelona, where he won 1 La Liga title in 6 years after that. So not necessarily the best choice by Kluivert on that occasion. And also, if Kluivert would come, the chances are Cole would have left, from his own words, and yet Cole had a phenomenal year.
Yeah, but he was left out an awful lot at the beginning of that season. I don't think he played together with York until that Southampton game, and they just clicked straight away, and they were fantastic, and they were, ever-present, really, and it was, tough for Sheringham and Solskjaer to get in the first-team lineup thereafter. But I think Cole was still rumoured to be leaving, even when York came. We just thank God that he didn't, because we wouldn't have had such poetry later on in the season.
I think also York, I think he was a great addition to the squad at that time, because despite the fact that, they were so successful, there were a lot of fractions in the squad in terms of, Sheringham and Keane didn't get on, didn't talk for a period of time. Sheringham and Cole didn't talk after an alleged slight at an England game. So I thought York was almost the middleman in some of those relationships. And obviously, it worked really well during the course of the season.
And the relationship between Cole and York, we've all seen it. We've all seen what wonderful goals they scored. But you don't get it very often. They were almost telepathic with each other. They just found each other so often in the right areas in and around the box. I mean, they made defences that are solid, like Barcelona and Juventus, look like idiots, because it was just 1-2 football, tipping round them and going through and scoring. Their relationship is unusually good. I mean, you can get great strikers who score loads of goals, but their chemistry was amazing.
The other thing that comes from this as well is that because Arsenal win the double the year before, it kind of sets up the narrative for this season as well. You have Wenger arriving, creating this the 2 managers who go on to dominate English football for the following decade, I guess. And I think you sort of needed Arsenal to win the season before in order to help create the narrative.
I agree, and it wasn't just that season, was it? They thrashed us in the Charity Shield, and then they won the first encounter between United and Arsenal in that season. So, it went on. I think it would have been very easy earlier on in the season to not believe that we could win the treble. I think obviously momentum built and we started to believe it as the season went on. But you look at those early few months and there was nothing there to say that Arsenal wouldn't, continue to dominate.
Absolutely. And interestingly, those 2 games, both defeated by 3-0. In fact, we only lost 5 games in the whole year. And in every one of those games, we conceded 3 goals. So 5 defeats in total. I like to compare to other alleged good teams. That compares to 7 defeats last year by Man City in their subsequent treble achievements. But we actually played an extra 2 games.
They've become what a penny these days, the trebles.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I don't like to pick holes, but actually of the 5 defeats, Fergie actually wasn't present for one of them. He was at a funeral, so I don't include that one either.
It was Middlesbrough. Yeah, Middlesbrough.
And Middlesbrough, of course, was the last defeat of the season. 33 games undefeated after the Middlesbrough game in December.
Looking back at the season and reminding myself of it, I was really surprised at how shaky that early season form is, and actually all those defeats do come in the first half of the year. I mean, Ferguson's teams had always tended to start slowly and were quite renowned for the strong finishes. But I mean, that really was probably the ultimate example of it. I mean, to go undefeated.
He said, I don't even look at the league table until after the Christmas period. He says, and it doesn't matter anyway. All it matters is when you run into March and April. He actually used to say that, and that's actually the way our results used to go.
In fairness, we have a series of Oxford managers who don't look at the table full stop.
Yeah.
Funny you should mention that, Graham, because Oxford have a pretty good record against United, as it happens. I think they've actually beat us 4 times, so that's a pretty good record. And in fact, the last 9 times that Oxford have played Man United, the sequence has been, from United's perspective, loss 1-1, loss 1-1, loss 1-1. So the next time you play us, you're going to beat us.
It's got to come. It's got to come.
But will it be in our lifetime, Rick?
Well, certainly not yours.
One thing worth mentioning, that early start when United are struggling, is the group that they're drawn in the Champions League. I mean, as groups go, it doesn't get more difficult than what they had up against with Bayern Munich, Barcelona, and Brøndby. And this was the time in the Champions League where
who were
only
a big
the
team
top
back in the day, Brøndby.
Brøndby were a big team.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I couldn't let that go.
I've been to Brøndby. I've been to Brøndby's ground. It's a great experience. They're crazy fans. One thing we forget with the Champions League is that it changes so often and so frequently. And this particular period, in the group stage, only the top team was certain to qualify. After that, it was a case of the 2 best runners-up across the 6 groups. So when you're in a group with Bayern Munich, Barcelona, and the massive Brøndby, it's going to be a big challenge because the Champions League runs from September to December in order to get out of that group. There were some big games that United took part in. I mean, the 2 Barcelona games are just breathtaking. They're just astonishing.
Yeah, they are. Great goals. But what I would also point out is group of deaths are the best groups to be in, aren't they? They're most exciting. That's what you want to be when you're watching your team. You want to be up against the best. And I think it brings out the best in United, and so it proved. But I would point out in this group of death that 2 of those teams didn't even win their leagues the year before, United and Bayern.
I went to both those games. The 3-3 in the Nou Camp was an astonishing game. And the whole Cole York step over 1-2. I think they did that then a couple of times during the same season. So it was a great game to witness. And Rivaldo, of course, was the winner of the best player in Europe that year.
Didn't he get the best dive in Europe as well because Stam didn't touch him?
Yeah, he was a bit of a diver, it's fair to say.
In addition to having a difficult path through to the Champions League, it's also quite tough in the FA Cup. I mean, Man United got their customary home draw, obviously, in every round, but unusually they have some. So actually, in fairness, it's a pretty tough lineup to get through to the final, isn't it?
Yeah, we always made it hard for ourselves, but we always came through.
You are right. There were home draws. However, there were 2 replays in the days of replays. So Chelsea went to a replay. And, of course, Arsenal went to the replay. So it was a challenging run in the FA Cup that year. And we did beat the mighty Fulham as well.
It may not surprise you to hear this, but I've done, on the United's treble-winning season, I pulled out some statistics. I've called them the degree of difficulty. And the FA Cup's a great example of this, where United are up against teams in the top tier. So I've gone all the way back to 1997-98 when Arsenal won the double, the season prior to this treble, and looked at all of the FA Cup winners and their route to the final. And United's top tier representation because they play 8 games. You're absolutely right, Rick, because they've got 2 replays, and your replays are a thing of the past. I mean, the last time a team played 8 games in an FA Cup run was when City won it in 2011, and when there were replays in place. But generally, you play 6 games, occasionally the 7th game if you get the odd replay. But United have had replays against Arsenal, who finished 2nd, and Chelsea, who finished 3rd. So it's a tough run. So they came out in my little statistical analysis, 87.5% difficulty, which basically means 7 out of the 8 teams they've played are in the top tier of English football. And Fulham, in fairness, they had knocked Southampton and Aston Villa out of the FA Cup to reach United in the 5th round. They were actually on pretty good run. They were on their march towards Premier League status. Just to give you a comparison stat, which I think you might like, especially Eric, City, when they won the FA Cup last year, they played 6 games and their degree of difficulty was 50%. So that's a 37.5%.
Exactly the point I'm making.
And that algorithm wasn't weighted in our favour at all, was it, Jamie? It was very, very objective.
It's totally objective. It's totally objective. I mean, I can't deny, when I started putting it together, I had an instinct. And yes, I had confirmed bias running through me the whole way. So I got the result I was looking for, but it's a justifiable, genuine result. And it goes into the data archives. Opta will be looking for these statistics, the degree of difficulty. And I can share with you the League and the Champions League at a later point in this podcast as well.
And I think also it's worth noting that the only decent team City played in the FA Cup run last season was the final. And the final, we were 5 minutes late getting on the pitch by the sound of it. And so I think that made a big impact on the result.
One of the things that was going on, which in fairness has off and on seemed to be going on at Man United quite a lot of the time, is off the field ownership challenges. And in this year, because you had the kind of the B Sky B thing, which I guess who'd have thought that Murdoch might have turned out to be not the worst owner you might have had.
That's true. Well, unfortunately, his man on the ground didn't know United's left back.
That is so true. and Edwards was going to the meeting thinking he was going to discuss TV rights. Then he was offered to sell the club. So it was a bit of a left field conversation. But to be honest, the whole season, that season was full of off the field activities. Let's just look at them. So this was the ABU start, wasn't it? Anyone but United started in this season. Fergie was called to a meeting before the season started to say, we don't think your focus is right. We had the whole B Sky B fiasco. We had Schmeichel giving his intention to resign halfway through the season. We had York and all of his son exposés of God knows how many liaisons throughout the season. There was lots and lots of things happening throughout the year that must have been pretty distracting to the team. But they were just relentless in terms of grinding out results. And this wasn't one of those seasons where there's lots of 4-0s, 5-0s, 6-0s. There were 2-1s and 1-0s and really ground out results, as we said earlier, in the last few minutes of the games. And I'm glad that this is the last podcast and you've left the best team to last, because I think this is a fitting conclusion to your series.
But although we did win a lot of close games, Rick, as we've been talking about, it started slow. But as the season went on, we went to every game believing we were going to win, even if we were losing. You know, and that's a feeling that you don't get very often. But we really had momentum that season. I never, ever thought we'd lost the game. Never.
Well, that's a good point, because I'm fairly cautious in my predictions of games.
Fairly?
And even I was confident going to Juventus in the second leg of the semi-final of the European Cup, thinking we would win that game, which is unheard of for me.
I can testify to Rick's optimism. I've been on the end of many text messages where he's been asked for a prediction, and 1-1 has been the default response.
But normally that is after a period of deliberation. It's not an instant 1-1. It's let me think about it for 10 minutes before I come back with a 1-1.
The other off-field thing that also was there at the start of the season was the fallout from David Beckham's red card. And it's difficult to kind of imagine it now, really, that he sort of came back a pariah from from that tournament. And when you saw the reaction he got, I think it was at West Ham as the first away game of the season.
West Ham early on, yeah.
Yeah, it was horrendous. But again, it depends how you look at it, because he went on to play probably his best season for United. He was phenomenal that season, and I think he was inspired by the fact that so much banter from the away fans all the time for him.
As fate dictates it, he then played Simeone again in the quarter-final against Inter Milan and had probably one of his best games in a United shirt at the home leg against Inter Milan. He was phenomenal in that game.
I would go as far to say I think that's the best Manchester United ever saw of David Beckham that season. And he finished second to Rivaldo in the Ballon d'Or as well. He actually harnessed the negativity and he turned it into a real positive. And I think you're seeing the development and growth of David Beckham in that season. He's growing out of this fledgling that's been under the wing of Fergie, and he's really making himself that global brand that he becomes finally. I mean, just some of the goals that he scored that season. The very first game, the Leicester free kick, is incredible. The free kick against Barcelona, the semi-final goal against Arsenal in the replay. And then, quite crucially, the last league game of the season, he gets United back into the game when, incredibly, they're losing to Tottenham. That's not something that you experience very often as a United fan.
But it's interesting because everyone talks about Keane that season and the season he had, and he was a force of nature during that season. And I think Beckham is overlooked, but I would agree with you, Jamie. I think that was probably his best season because he was absolutely incredible in terms of delivery of his free kicks we all know about. His work rate was unbelievable. I think he was allegedly the fittest player in the club. And he just had a fantastic season. And I think the incident in the World Cup in St Etienne just galvanised him to absolutely get stuck in for the whole season. And he was phenomenal throughout the season.
I'm glad you mentioned St Etienne. We did them on the in last week's podcast, and we're struggling to think of other famous incidents around St Etienne, and we missed probably the most obvious one.
Yeah, we had the band.
Jamie, how did you miss that?
What happened to the research there, Jamie?
I was too busy looking for associated band names relating to football.
Yeah, that's very true. So it's interesting, isn't it? We talk about Keane and Beckham, and certainly from an outsider's perspective, when you look at Man United and that era of the Man United, highly successful, you think of that midfield four of Keane, Scholes, Giggs and Beckham. In my mind, they played together every week and the whole time. I imagine in reality, actually, with various injury problems for them, you couldn't get them out on the pitch together that much. But did they play much as a four this season?
Yeah, they played quite a lot as a four this season. But certainly we had issues with injuries and suspensions as the season ended. We ended up with a midfield duo of Nicky Butt and David Beckham in the centre midfield in the final, which I can't say worked particularly well.
In that game, Giggs played on the right and Blomqvist on the left. So that was the only team, the only game those four played in those positions before and after. They never played in those positions again.
That midfield four was, the Beckham, Scholes, Keane, Giggs. It on the face of it, it appears the most perfectly balanced midfield combination that you could have, doesn't it? Especially in a 4-4-2.
Especially in a 4-4-2.
And I think they played 4-4-2 pretty much every game, with a couple of exceptions. So that was the default formation throughout the whole of the season.
In fact, it was a default formation for Fergie for most of his time at United, to be honest. It only changed in the noughties, didn't it?
Yeah, I think Mourinho's arrival changes things. I think that starts bringing a different dynamic to how teams started playing, and formation became under the spotlight. You're absolutely right. It was 4-4-2. And United actually didn't use that many players. In terms of players that played 10 games or more across the whole season, they only used 18 players. So the midfield backup would have been Butt and Blomqvist. They would have been the two that would have been ready to come in to replace. It just so happens that both of them had to come in at the same time in the biggest game of the season.
I think Cruyff was there that season as well.
He was, yeah.
You ordered Cruyff.
A legend of the game. I was disappointed because Poborski was kicking around about then, wasn't he? You got rid of him the previous year?
He came in before and he went before as well. So he'd gone a few seasons before, and Blomqvist had come in as because Fergie loved his wingers. He absolutely loved pace. So much so he tried to make a player out of David Bellion, which he didn't succeed at.
And I think Blomqvist absolutely took the piss out of David May, didn't he, in a previous game? And allegedly Giggs showed him, when he turned up in the dressing room, Giggs showed him to David May and said, "Look, here he is, David." So I think it was largely on the back of that performance that Fergie actually signed him. But talking about players, one player who played one game all season and never played for the club again, Alex Notman, played in the League Cup defeat that season, his only game for United, and never played again, and became an engineer in Norwich. I love stories like that.
He played for Norwich as well, I think.
And he's unlucky, isn't he? He plays in the one tournament they don't win.
Correct.
Not quite as extreme, but that's a bit like Alan Davis in the 1983 FA Cup with his side. He was man of the match, and he barely played again after that game, and he'd only come in right at the end of the season.
Unlike Jonathan Greening, who was part of the Champions League winning squad and hadn't played a single minute in the Champions League.
And David May, who played the odd game, but decided he was the most important player in all the photographs after the game.
Oh, so he was the John Terry of the outfit.
Yeah, exactly.
But unlike John Terry in 2008, David May wasn't crying on that particular occasion.
Yeah.
Let's look at those individual tournaments and competitions. So the league was, Jamie, that was a pretty hotly disputed league, wasn't it? You had 2-3 sides up there.
Yeah, it's one of the few times in Premier League history, it's only happened, I think, 2 or 3 times before, where you've actually got 3 teams that can win the league going into the final game of the season. So obviously, United had the edge on Arsenal and had to win. But Chelsea were in the mix as well. Chelsea could have won the league if results had gone their way on that particular day. So on the very final day of the season, you're not just competing with Arsenal, who have won the double the previous season, and you've got the whole Wenger Ferguson rivalry. You've got Chelsea, this is pre-Abramovich as well, has popped up and is very close to winning its first Premier League.
Yeah, and that was the season when Sky first started doing that thing. Because there were 3 teams involved, they were sort of showing what was happening real time on TV. So, when United went 1-0 down, they were panning that across and showing that Arsenal were winning the league and vice versa. And that I think that was the first season they had the opportunities to do that. And that obviously was very exciting for the armchair supporters.
And I think also going into May, I think we were second in the league. And we then had our friends down the East Lancs Road to play at Anfield, which has been a bit of a graveyard for us in recent years and is never an easy game for United to go. An ex-legend, I use the word very loosely, scored a last-minute equaliser for Liverpool, the one and only Paul Ince, and then celebrated as if he'd won the Champions League on his own by diving into the Cop. Ever since, he's one of the few players that after that who came to Old Trafford, ex-players who got a poor reception, deservedly so. I hasten to add.
Absolutely. But also, that wasn't that when, very harsh for those days, Dennis Irwin got sent off for a second yellow card for kicking the ball away when it was unheard of.
We had some very narrow wins, couple of draws in those last few games into May. So as you're quite rightly saying, Jamie, we went to the last game against Spurs, really needing a win. And I think Les Ferdinand scored the first goal, so we were 1-0 down. Going into that game. So it was, as I said earlier, it wasn't an easy, comfortable league victory by any stretch of the imagination. It went right down to the wire. And joking aside, Arsenal did have a fantastic team that year.
Well, it's interesting just looking at that running. I think United draw 4 of the last 8 games. I mean, they win before, they don't lose any, but it's a bit jangly. It is proper squeaky bum time, isn't it?
That's when United are at their best. When their backs are up against the wall, that's when they're at their best. I don't, it's like the group of death and stuff. It's like, I don't like it when we're playing like so-called allegedly weaker teams and stuff, because that's kind of when we often trip up and don't do so well. So yeah, it was very, very tight towards the end, but that's what I watch football for it to be exciting. I like to have a bit of adrenaline inside me.
The other thing is we beat Juve, and then 4 days later we go to Ellen Road, which, as David and I will both testify, is not the most friendly of venues for United fans. So they were psyched up beyond belief in that game. Absolutely unbelievably so. And again, a really tough game, 1-1 draw. A game we could have easily, on the adrenaline of the Juve game, we could have easily lost. There were absolutely no easy games in that run-in at all.
But there were loads of events during the season. I mean, one in the FA Cup final, Keane gets injured. And surprisingly to everybody, Ferguson decides to bring on Sheringham, not a central midfielder, but another striker. And he then goes on to score one and lay one on. And it's just like, events like that are just like amazing. It's almost like you think the season was meant to be, because all those little events did go our way.
Yeah, Sheringham's an interesting one, because obviously he came as not the direct replacement of Cantona, but he came to replace the effect of the team of Cantona and playing that number 10 role. And then it was much maligned because Arsenal went on and won the double, and Arsenal fans created that famous song that was adopted from them just 12 months later. But Sheringham features massively in this season in terms of important moments, but he doesn't play many games at all. He makes 11 starts and he only scores 5 goals. But his impact on the team and the season is incredibly telling.
I think this was also the season when he decided to jump in his Ferrari and go down to London for a night out rather than go training. And Fergie, who has a network of spies, not only in Manchester, but also across the country, obviously found out about it. And Sheringham apparently debated with himself whether to try and bluff his way out of it or come clean. Wisely, he decided to come clean, find a week's wages, and told to book his ideas up.
Yeah, I think the Sheringham one's a good example, though. Yeah, he was very influential, as obviously so was Solskjaer. And the fact is, that's the knack that Ferguson had, especially in this season, of balancing the squad. These are two players who didn't play that many games, didn't play that many minutes. But boy, did they have some real highlights that season, and ended up both scoring in the Champions League final. I mean, if there's ever a story for people to say it's a squad game and you've got to not always be part of it because actually your time will come, this is the story. This season is the story, because those two didn't get that many minutes, yet, they'll go down in history for it.
And also, you look at United now, we struggled to find a goal scorer. We had 4 proven goal scorers throughout that season. And invariably what would happen, if it wasn't going according to plan in the 65th minute, you could swap your front two for 2 absolute prime goal scorers. And that happens so many times throughout the course of the season. Now we rely on Rashford, and if he doesn't score, we're screwed. There we had 4 top-class strikers. Oh, for those days again.
They weren't just top class. They were, the two pairings were very different. So the style of Cole and York, they get used to that for 60 minutes. Then you bring on Sheringham and Solskjaer, whose style of play is just completely different. And the defenders have got to switch their game really, really quickly. And Solskjaer was the actual student of football. He talks about how when he was on the bench, he used to study the game as to where the gaps and the weaknesses were, which is why he was so effective coming off the bench, because he knew where the gaps were, he knew where the weaknesses were, and worked for us very, very often.
He could have made a good manager, I think.
Now, most seasons, winning the league title on the last game of the season would be an exciting enough end on its own. But actually, that's almost the least dramatic of the wins. If you go back then to the FA Cup, and Jamie's talked about how difficult a run it was to get through even to the semi-final, but the semi-final against Arsenal, presumably that has to go down as one of the most extraordinary matches ever, from a United fan perspective.
Without a doubt, again, I talked earlier about pivotal moments. I mean, a last-minute penalty, Phil Neville brings down Parler, and Bergkamp steps up to win the game in the last minute. Schmeichel saves it, and the rest is history. It's those pivotal moments again, isn't it? It's just it's phenomenal. And then I was right behind the goal that Giggs scored in.
We were,
yeah. Just amazing. I mean, because we were down and out, down to 10 men, Keane had been sent off as usual. And it was just we were just hoping for extra time at that point, thinking, get to penalties, because they were all over us, to be frank. And then, Vieira passes the ball to Giggs, and the rest is history.
But don't forget, Anelka scored a goal that was deemed to be offside, and I was too busy holding my head in my hands to look at the linesman on my right. He was right on our side, and I thought we were doomed then. Obviously, I thought we were doomed when Bergkamp stepped up to take the penalty. Interestingly, he scored 22 penalties in his career and never took a penalty after that game. So it obviously disturbed him mightily, that miss. Schmeichel was fantastic in that game, and Keane getting sent off. And then do you remember he was then fighting in the tunnel with the Arsenal fans who were baiting him as he got sent off?
That Anelka goal that got disallowed, best thing about it though is they were celebrating with their coaches for about 2 or 3 minutes before they realised it was offside. Absolutely fantastic.
That was the days when you could actually celebrate when the ball went in the net.
It was bizarre because the celebration does seem to go on for a long period of time. Yet, David Ellery, the referee at the time, is clearly confirmed with the linesman or the assistant, whatever you want to call him, that the goal is deemed offside, and he's made the decision, he's blown the whistle. But I think the pandemonium that you're talking about, Rick, in Villa Park in that particular moment was just so palpable that no one realises that the goal's been chalked off. The referee's made a decision, and the celebrations just go into the rest of next week.
Although I have to say, Giggs' celebration was wasn't the greatest, was it?
Funny enough, we talked about this on last week's podcast. We did Leicester City last week with Matt, who's a Tottenham fan. It was real torture for him, bless him. And we talked about the Chelsea-Tottenham game where they drew 2-2 and Tottenham confirmed that they can't win the league. In the last 10 minutes, Tottenham just lose the plot and they're just reacting like fans. I think Giggs is just reacting like a fan. He can't believe himself what he's done. And he's just reacting like every single one of us at that particular moment. I don't think he's conscious that he's a professional footballer at that moment.
I think the other thing about the Cup semi win is it also, because you talk about, the confidence of actually going into games expecting United to win. But I suppose the one team that possibly had the sign over you at the time was Wenger's Arsenal, wasn't it? I mean, that would have been the first win against them since Wenger came in, or definitely since they won the league. So, I mean, that must have been a huge turning point.
Absolutely. Domestically, Arsenal were always the big threat. And as you said, we'd had an appalling run of results with them prior to those 2 cup games. Been defeated twice earlier on in the season, as we've mentioned. They just had the Indian sign over us. And when I said earlier about I was confident at Juventus, I wasn't confident in that game at all. And as the game went by and the incidents just piled on, I just felt it was a matter of time before they would win the game. I was stood next to David, and he is super confident no matter what. So he was always confident. I was the exact opposite in that game.
It did feel like the stars were against us, and not in an unlucky way. At the end of the day, the penalty was a clear penalty. Keane deserved to get sent off. So it wasn't like they were against us and we'd been unlucky, but they were against us. It seemed like everything was going against us in that game. And it hadn't been that season. It had been going for us an awful lot. And it did feel like that. So, I had to pick Rick up off the floor and stop him crying and say, come on, we can still do this, Rick.
Not the only time you've had to do that.
Having beaten Arsenal in the semi-final, you then still have to win the final against Newcastle. But I guess that feels like a bit of after the Lord Mayor show. Yeah,
I mean, I think that, in that last week, which is an incredible sort of 10 days or something of tension, but then the FA Cup final I actually thought was quite calm. There was no tension in the game at all. It was almost like Newcastle just rolled over.
I think Graham, talking about the FA Cup final, 2 things I guess I noticed. One was we scored early, 11 minutes, and I think after that we were just comfortable throughout. And Keane was injured, of course, but we were just comfortable throughout it. So I was never in any doubt during the FA Cup final that we would win that game. And the other thing I noticed was I was just delighted that the 2 teams had completely normal pre-match suits and none of this Armani white nonsense that most people wouldn't even wear it at a wedding. Us class, grey, Versace suits, none of this Armani rubbish. That was the thing that really cheered me up.
Are you not referring to the Spice Boys there by any chance, are you, from 96?
I'm more referring to Jamie's choice of attire at weddings.
We all make mistakes.
The last of the three, and obviously what feels like the hardest one to win and the biggest challenge, and probably the one that people will always remember the most, almost regardless of the fashion it was done in, was the Champions League. And before we get to the final, the semi-final is quite a challenging game as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the semi-final, I was looking to go to San Siro to see the 1-1 against Milan, which is just a phenomenal stadium. That was a fantastic game. But Juve at home, that was a hostile crowd. And again, I was really lucky to get a ticket for that game. And it was a wet, miserable evening. There wasn't many United fans. And you just look at the team that they had on the pitch. Okay, they didn't have a great season by their standards, but you look at the team they put out in terms of Davies, Deschamps, Zidane, of course, Inzaghi, Conte. I mean, you just go on and on and on in terms of that team. And of course, they scored 2 quick goals. So I can't remember, maybe within 15 minutes, we were 2-0 down. I knew all along we had to score at least 2 goals. We had to score 2 goals. So, as I said earlier, by my standards, I was relatively comfortable in that game. But that was a hell of a game. And of course, Keane was just absolutely immense in that game.
I thought his header, by the way, against Juventus to get us back into it, other than the gigs in the semi-final, was one of my favourite goals of the season because it just changed the tone of that whole game.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He's playing at the mentality that he knows he's not going to be playing in the final if he sees his team through. But you're right, Rick, because about the quality of Juventus. Zidane's playing, Edgar Davids is playing. Inzaghi scored the first 2 goals, and he wasn't offside for those 2, but he was offside for his third one later in the game. This is a period of time where the Premier League wasn't seen as a top division. There were players coming to play into the league from other parts of the world, but the main league at the time was still Serie A in Italy. So the Italian teams were still the place for players to go. And United getting to the final and beating Bayern Munich in the final was the first time an English team had won the Champions League for 15 years, I think it was as well. And now we're used to seeing English teams get to the latter stages of the European Cup. But when United did this, it was groundbreaking for England. It was really groundbreaking at the time.
You look at the midfield that day for Juve and the Dan, Davies, Deschamps. Keane was unbelievable during that game.
So I gave you a degree of difficulty for the FA Cup. I did one for the European Champions League that season as well. And I based it on teams that have won the European Cup since the Champions League started in 1992 that have played previous champions. So United played 13 games in total in that Champions League campaign. 9 of those games were against teams against previous champions that had won the Champions League. That's a 69.2% ratio. It's by far and away the highest in competition. Ironically, the second highest is Manchester City last year. They played 7 previous champions in their 13 games. But the average of that is 42% in terms of play in previous champions. So United are way above that average in terms of their degree of difficulty of their opponents in that Champions League run.
Yeah, and I think just to build on 2 of those points, Jimmy, I do think winning the Champions League nowadays is a different prospect for English teams than it was back in the 90s. Because then Serie A were definitely the dominant league. We were the lesser teams and we had a lot to, we had to play really, really well to get to those last stages. Whereas now, the English teams kind of dominate the Champions League. And, we've had, all English finals in the last few years. So I'm not saying it makes it easier from winning it in totality, but I think it's easier for English teams to get to the final and have a chance of winning it than it was back in the 90s, without any doubt whatsoever.
And when you see that Barca didn't get through the group stage because United and Bayern obviously were ahead of them in that. So you knock out effectively Barca in the group stage and the mighty Bromby, And then you're playing Inter, Juve, and then Bayern. That is some pedigree of European champions, isn't it? Both before and after 99.
When United met Bayern Munich in the final, it's only the second time in the history of the Champions League, and the last time that teams from the same group, that qualified from the same group, have gone on to meet each other in the final. The first time that happened was in 95 when Ajax Amsterdam play AC Milan. So United and Munich, who met in the group stage, go on to meet in the final. That's the last time a Champions League group of first and second met in a final.
It's a good fact. Also, wasn't it the only time that the two sides have been captained by goalkeepers?
Oh, wow.
Good start.
Yeah.
Good start.
I had forgotten, until you mentioned it earlier, I had forgotten about the... I remember that Keane missed out. I had forgotten that Scholes was injured too. So you're right, that in the final itself against Bayern, that is a relatively lightweight United midfield.
Well, I think they're all good players, don't get me wrong, but it is lightweight. And the fact is, I think you said, or Jamie said something, it's like it was the first time that midfield had played together, and it was the last time they'd played together. So they just didn't have knowledge of each other, or and it's all about partnerships and combinations and people playing together, where you get that cohesiveness about the team, and it's the first time they'd played together. So yeah, it was worrying as a fan going into it, that we had that, and you would just hope our great forwards would pull it out on the night, and they did.
It was one of those days where the whole day was just anticipating the game. It was a fantastic weather. There was huge numbers of United fans down the Ramblas and all that area of Barcelona, which is probably my favourite city after Manchester. And the whole build-up to the game felt incredibly special. We all felt we were witnessing something amazing. And it was, of course, or would have been, Sir Matt Busby's 90th birthday on the day. So it just had that feeling that we were going to witness something amazing. As it happened, we didn't play well. They hit the post, the bar, good save by Schmeichel, and, it goes right down to the wire in terms of those two injury time goals. But the whole event was just astonishing, and so privileged to witness it.
Even the first goal is a collection of mishits. It's a thing of beauty, but there's nothing deliberate really going on. I mean, I give Sheringham the benefit of the doubt because he is a great striker, but even his touch looks like a mishit, but it's just rebounding all over the place.
Yeah, but you take any goal. Every goal counts, whether it's a beautiful goal or whether it's not a beautiful goal. I mean, Berbatov wouldn't agree with us there, but they do. They all count the same, don't they? And at that time, Bayern were rocking. We had them on the back foot, and you're right. It was going around like a pinball machine, wasn't it? And it comes to Sheringham. Kahn obviously was offside when he clearly wasn't, and then we started praying that we didn't concede again, and it went to extra time, and we needn't have worried. I have to get in on the final as well. It's one. I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago about our favourite commentary moments, and of course, England World Cup comes in there and other things. But and United score, they always score, is certainly an iconic commentary moment from the final.
Yeah, Clive too. I mean, commentators, these guys are they're poets. I mean, how they kind of spin their words in the moment when they're watching this real life action and there's that emotion going on is incredible. But yeah, it was Clive Tilsley at the time, and you're absolutely right. It was the first corner. Can Manchester United score? They always score. And then he follows that up with name on the trophy. It's just
He did name on the trophy.
It's a beautiful sequence that clearly he's had in his back pocket, and the timing of it is just absolute art.
And interestingly, I have his match notes on the wall behind me, and there is actual, or obviously not the original, a replica of his match notes from that game.
That's incredible.
Very nice.
Once Sheringham equalises, there is almost an inevitability about the injury time. You can see Bayern are absolutely broke.
I still have the image when we're talking of Sami Kufur, or whatever his name was, as the second goal goes in and he's on the ground, thumping the ground. It's like he just couldn't believe what had just happened.
It's a really good point, Graham, because if you watch, and it's brilliant, you can watch that 2.5, 3 minutes where it all happens quite easily on YouTube. And the body language, as you've outlined, of Bayern Munich, they're absolutely crestfallen. But the energy from United is like there's been no energy at that particular point in the season. I think the players collectively knew, without saying it, we've got them on the ropes. Let's finish him off now. Let's not worry about added time. It is almost like this unsaid kind of mentality that we're going to get a second goal in the remaining seconds of the game. It's the body language gives so much away watching those two teams in that critical moment when it goes 1-1.
The treble used to be difficult to win. And during that season, there were so many last-gasp goals that have taken us to the treble. And now everybody seems to be able to win the treble. But back in 99, it was a challenge to win the treble.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sensing there's a line in a pitch and a narrative being displayed here by the three United fans on here that in some way that United's treble was better than one done by some near neighbours a few months ago.
I would just say I will leave that to objective football fans to judge, not people who are biased like us. I think they'll come to the same conclusion.
I think, Jamie, I was going on to say that you've already stated that statistically there are a number of indicators that indicate this was a superior treble to one that was won by the noisy neighbours a few months ago. And you just look at the facts, we lost 5 times, they lost 7 times, 63 games versus 61 games. All the stats seem to lead to only one conclusion from my perspective.
Another stat to flavour that is the treble. When United won the treble, they were the 4th team to do it, I think, after Celtic, Ajax and PSV. And then Barcelona did it 9 years later. So in that period between Celtic and Barcelona, that's 55 years of Champions or European Cup football, and you've got 5 trebles: the domestic cup, the league, and the European Cup. So that's statistically, that's one every 11 years that somebody's doing a treble. Since Barcelona in 08-09, it's happened 6 times. So 6 times in the last 3 years. So you've gone from something that was happening once every 11 years in the last 15 years. Sorry, it's happening every 3 years. So it does beg the question: why is it becoming easier to win a European Cup treble?
I'd agree. I think it has become easier, and I'm not sure I know the answer to that. But I'd just like to go back to your original point of the people who did it before United. You said Celtic, PSV and Ajax. Let's face it, 2 parts of their trebles weren't exactly challenging, were they? Because they're playing in Scotland and Holland. So it's not quite the same as United winning in our domestic league, is it? So, let's put that in perspective, really. So, there is an argument to say ours was the first proper treble.
Well, it's a compelling argument. I'll just leave it that I'll have you all back here this time next year when we celebrate City's double treble success.
Well, that would just prove our point that it's become easier, wouldn't it?
There is a slight end of era for this United version. Obviously, Schmeichel leaves, and it does kind of leave the goalkeeping crisis that happens the following year, which, again, if you're not a Man United supporter, was one of the funniest things to happen in club football for the last 30 years.
You are Massimo Taibbi by any chance, are you?
Yes.
I was just going to say that I mentioned earlier that I think Beckham was the fittest player in the club. They also signed Mark Bosnich post Schmeichel in an attempt to fill that gap. I was told by someone who I believe to be 100% accurate that he was the most unfit player that arrived at United during that period. Incredibly ups. In fact, the guy said to me, Rick, you're fitter than Mark Bosnich is. And thinking back to my fitness at the time, that was something to come out with.
He's also to blame for taking Dwight York off the rails with their evening activities. So, he also, I think was the beginning of the end for York at that point.
I don't think Yorkie needed much encouragement, did he?
So we should probably start thinking about how great this side are under our bizarre and pretty confusing ranking system. I think I might get outvoted in this one, but we have 5 categories of greatness with all-time greats right at the top, followed by true greats, touch of greatness, and I won't bother with listing the other ones because we're definitely not. I don't think I could claim that the treble-winning United side are edge of greatness. They're definitely right up there.
So far, I've regarded you, Graham, as being very objective, so I don't really see how you could be outvoted.
Let's start with Jamie. Go on, Jamie. You get us moving on this. What level of greatness do you put towards this team?
Well, I mean, I've already shared with you my degree of difficulty stats. The hardest FA Cup run in the last 25 years against top class opponents. The hardest Champions League run since the Champions League began against previous winners. And they're in a 3-horse title race, which doesn't happen very often. I mean, we've covered all of the great things in this season, but the midfield you touched on, Graham, is probably one of the best midfields the Premier League has ever seen in terms of its balance in the 4-4-2. Without rambling like I normally would, it's easy for me. Blinkers or no blinkers, they're all-time greats and one of the best.
Rick, what about you?
I think Jamie has jumped to a conclusion a little too swiftly. I think there are some downsides during the course of the season. So Bromby was a challenge that I felt we struggled to overcome in the early days. And don't forget, we had to pre-qualify for the Champions League during this season. However, you then look at the teams you beat, the players that were within those teams, and I can't get through that Juve team that was just unbelievable to beat those over 2 legs in the semi. So I probably would agree that they would, in my humble opinion, drop into the all-time greatness category.
And David, I think I've got a rough idea where you may be going.
I agree with Rick. There were a couple of weaknesses. I think in terms of centre of defence, I think we were a one-man team with Stam, and people played alongside him, but I don't think anyone dominated that position. It was Stam that dominated it. But in terms of the options up front, and in terms of the midfield, and in terms of our goalkeeper, I mean, they were just exceptional. Also, when we talk about, the momentum and the spirit in the club, I think that's not unique, but it's very special. But the thing that decides my mind more than anything else is I just can't think of anybody else who would be higher than us. So if we don't get to the all-time greatness, what's the category you're going to put people in to get there? Because it doesn't make any sense.
It is difficult to argue you guys down on that one. Completing the treble, and the teams United beat puts it up there. They definitely do it the hard way. It is interesting. The season isn't littered with a series of really heavy victories. I mean, you've got the Notts Forest game, but actually looking through them, it is tight. United aren't able to run away with in the league, in the cup, in the Champions League. It is a battle all the way through. But that kind of just adds to the narrative, and for drama alone, it really can't be beaten. It is to do the treble in literally the last 3 minutes of injury time is just an extraordinary achievement. So I don't think I can say anything against it. So Man United, 1999 treble winners, all-time greats.
Well done.
Great decision, Graham.
One last thing we do a little kind of time machine moment where we kind of look back and consider a game which, if you could go back to, any moments standing out for you guys?
There are a lot. For me, it's a straight choice between Juve away and the semi-final replay, and I think I would go for the semi-final replay. Just against all the odds, things are going against us, and a moment of magic just changes our destiny, because of course we couldn't have won the treble without it.
I'd probably go a little earlier. I think when you get incredible joy at a moment in a football match, it's quite rare, and we were privileged to have a number of them during that season. But Ollie scoring the winner against Liverpool at Old Trafford in front of 8,000 Liverpool fans takes a lot of beating, to be honest. So I'd probably go for the FA Cup 4th round victory.
And to be honest, I wouldn't even argue with that. I think that's another great game.
Jamie, what about you?
Yeah, mine's more personal because I didn't go to the second game of the semi-final like these guys. I could have gone, but I didn't. I went to the first one where it finished 0-0 and Keane's goal was disallowed. So given the chance again, I think I'd love to be a part of that semi-final. I know how I felt watching it on television. I can't imagine how much that would have been magnified being at that game. So yeah, a little kind of lifetime regret really. But if I had my time again, that's the place I'd like to go to.
Have you got a favourite game, Graham, being a non-United fan?
The semi-final, obviously, I think is a fabulous moment to see that cup final. I think the drama of that probably wins it. Part of me would be curious to go back to the Forest game when Solskjaer comes on at 4-1, and then, but not to watch Solskjaer, more to keep an eye on Cole and York, who've got 2 each at that stage, wondering, hang on a minute, what's going on here? I'd quite like to see that.
Yeah. And it was like that. It was definitely like that.
Excellent. Okay, well, we should probably wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you very much, David. It's been brilliant getting your memories from that season. It's been has been a fabulous story. Jamie, thank you for your impartiality, relatively speaking.
Thanks, Graham.
Good job.
So that's it. All we have time for. If you enjoyed listening, a reminder to subscribe to the podcast to get new episodes every Thursday. And of course, you can follow us and contact us on the social channels at By Far the Greatest FC. And we'll speak again next week for another Greatest Team.